My name is Stacey McGee, and I'm a volunteer with the RAIC, the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada, the Vancouver Island South Network. I'm an architect here in BC, and prior to the RAIC, of which we've become locally much more aggressive in our activities and membership over the last couple of years, we were a chapter of the AIBC, but we've made this transition. And we've been doing several events over the last couple of years. And preceding this one, there was, at the beginning, the opening of the Castri exhibit in June. So we had a fantastic evening that night. Upwards of 80 to 90 people were here, and we had a brilliant talk. We have a technician over here from Shaw. So Shaw was here that night, and that event is going to be playing on their community television, as will be tonight. So thank you, John. So we wanted to have the Castri exhibit go off with a bang. We didn't want to just say, well, pack the cartons up and we'll take things down from the walls. We wanted to have a real closure. But we didn't want to repeat what we did back in June. So tonight is more about, a little bit about the behind the scenes to make something like this happen. So if I'm not mistaken, I was reading this on the way over. Architectural curation, exhibition as a means of architectural discovery and assessment. So tonight we've got three esteemed members of a panel. Each one of them is going to come up and begin their presentations, and then we will close by having a Q&A with them, each sitting down here. I'm going to introduce all of them first, and then they will come up one at a time with their presentations. So first of all, we have Professor Martin Sager, who's just off to my left here, architectural historian, Associate Fellow, Center for Global Studies at UVic. Martin's administrative and academic career has included the positions of Director of Art Galleries and Collections at the University of Victoria and Adjunct Professor in the Department of History in Art, Faculty in Fine Arts. He holds a BA in English Literature and a Diploma in Education, Secondary Curriculum from the University of Victoria, and a Master of Philosophy in Renaissance Cultural Studies from the Warburg Institute, University of London, where he studied under Professor Sir Ernst Gombrich. In 1982, he was elected a Fellow of the Royal Society of Arts, and in 1999, a Fellow of the Canadian Museums Association. He has served as President of the Society of Architectural Historian, Pacific Northwest Chapter, and President of the Commonwealth Association of Museums, and he's consulted and taught historic preservation planning in South America and Africa. His areas of academic research, teaching, and curatorship are architectural history, the decorative arts, heritage, and museum studies.
Where did you find all that?
Well, you can get all this stuff on the web. Alan Collier, sitting over here. Modern design in Canada. He's an exhibit expert. Alan is a longtime resident of Victoria, a furniture and design maker, researcher, teacher, curator, and collector who specializes in Canadian craft and design dating from 1940 to 1980. Alan is one of the foremost authorities on post-war Canadian design. Alan was awarded the 2020 Citizen of Craft Award given by the Craft Council of BC. And finally, Ben Clinton Baker is a local historian whose work focuses on the cultural history of the Salish Sea region and of Victoria in particular. He studied anthropology as an undergrad at Concordia University in Montreal And after traveling to the UK to learn about his own family history, he enrolled as a graduate student in the history department at the University of Victoria, from which he graduated with a master's degree in 2012. Since then, he has worked and volunteered in various fields of local and community history, especially in his home district of Oak Bay. He is interested in the role of history in connecting people with place and the central position of architecture in this relationship. He has been a curator here at the Wentworth Villa since 2021. So Martin, we invite you to take the stand.
Thank you very much.
So all that stuff about me, I'd forgotten most of it. I don't think it has much bearing on what I have to say today. Architectural curation, the topic or the task we were given was the use of architectural exhibits for architectural evaluations, criticism, and architectural conservation. Can I just, before I start, how many architects are here? One? Two? Two architects. The rest of you are well-informed general public, right? Okay. That helps me a bit. So what I'm going to do is just, I'm hoping we're going to have plenty of time for discussion. So I'm going to give you a few generalities, and then I'm going to show you two kind of case studies or exhibits, one of which I'm hoping most of you might have seen, and that's the fact that is the exhibit at the Royal BC Museum at the moment, and the other is one I ran across in Vancouver the other day. So there are many kinds of architectural exhibitions, but we're talking about public exhibitions here today. And those of you that are architects, you do this all the time in the proposal presentation, right? The standard get up before City Council or your client and you make the pitch. So you're used to curating at that level. There are many other architectural exhibitions. In Victoria, we're used to house museums. We have a lot of them. Historic sites, we have 3 or 4 major ones. And there are emerging now a whole sort of category of new kinds of exhibits, some called immersion exhibits, the Van Gogh that was recently, I think still here actually till the end of the month. And then what I'm calling thematic, so biographical. Around the walls here we have John de Castri's material, Walk Through the House, and you'll see reference to 2 or 3 biographical exhibits. And then historical of a general nature, I think the house here is engaged in one of those. And then exhibits around issues. And I do want to get to issues one tonight. So I was looking for a big picture kind of quote. I found one and then I lost who I got it from, but it sounds good. Curating architectural exhibitions is becoming an intensively engaged practice that strives to expand and enrich the discipline, open it to the public, and ground it within a larger social and cultural context. So that's kind of where those of us who are in the business of curating architectural exhibits find ourselves today. And exhibitions typically generate an encounter for the viewer, whether professional or members of the general public. They connect architecture to the public consciousness, exhibits as places of meditation, interaction, mediation, education, conservation, deliberation, inspiration, and of course experimentation. As well, of course, they act to enrich the cultural intensity of the community. So go on, exhibitions. So I ran across this the other day, a promo for an exhibit that's just opened in Ottawa, and it's under the heading Explore the Main Parliamentary Building, called the Centre Block, in this innovative experience that includes an exhibition and a 360-degree multimedia show. It offers an immersive experience, unique and compelling, a journey through the main Parliament buildings through sound, light, and images. The exhibits and show take visitors through the history, art, and architecture of Canada's most iconic building. Without doubt, it will be popular, blah, 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 the Honourable Anthony Rota. But I mean, this is kind of interesting, isn't it? Because we all know the Parliament buildings, no public can go in there at the moment, and probably won't be able to for the next 7 or 8 years. Parliament, Senate have moved out. So instead, they give you an immersive experience, and no doubt that what those things cost to set up, you're going to be treated through $2 or $3 million worth of exhibit extravaganza, but I do recommend it to you. So we have 2 or 3 architectural exhibits here in town at the moment. The Castri one here, obviously. The House has an exhibit focusing on the architectural history of Victoria. We have one which is highly controversial, and I won't go there, but it's Old Town, which reopened itself just the other day. But one which who in the room has seen Angkor? Great. So I just wanted to take you through it, mainly for the kind of techniques which these kinds of exhibits bring to the fore today to explore various themes. I would categorize it primarily as an anthropological exhibit. It claims, as you can see, scientists using contemporary technology have expanded our knowledge on this historic site, so they get into that. Home to a large, complex society, ancient Angkor was a bustling community of elite craftsmen, ruling class members, and a specialized priesthood. So they're going to tell you something about the social life. And it boasts original objects from the UNESCO site and a variety of interactive displays, audio clips, and films that bring this vast, dynamic metropolis to life. And of course, today, Angkor is a World Heritage Site. It is not a lived-in city, as it was. So the task of the exhibitors here is to bring it to life and also to situate it in a context. The wider context, there's a panel beginning, gives you a kind of a brief history of its, quotes, discovery, because it was always known by the people who lived there, but anyway, it was discovered by the French in the late 19th century. It then gives you on a timeline, as you can see to the right, how it fits in with what people were building in Europe and elsewhere at the time, around the time of the construction of the Tower of Pisa and Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, Chartres, and other places. And it then takes you to a Angkor from above to kind of situate you in the city. It uses models, photographs, historic and contemporary, and then it gets into the science of what has really opened up Angkor in the recent times, and that is the application of Lidar photography that sees through the tree canopy and even to a certain depth of the ground. And what that has revealed and what the exhibit goes on to sort of tell you about is the fact that you are actually looking at a city that at one time housed over 700,000 people, extending over a radius of 20 miles or more. So it shows you the results of the photography, how to read it, and then on the lower right there, I just show you there's this little interactive map which you can jiggle some handheld little knobs, and you can tour the site, and it'll bring up various components of the original elements, archaeological and standing, to show you kind of where they were and how. It involves numerous techniques to tell its story, engaging various age levels. And here you see, I watched this marvelous little kid take the puzzle of the pieces, and lo and behold, see, there we are. She actually put it all together. Took her about 3 minutes. It would have taken me twice as long. And then as you walk through the exhibit, they bring forward the various components of the decorative program that embellishes the site and sets it against images of the architectural, of the monument itself, or the pieces of the monument that relate to these pieces, so you can put them in place and see how they fit together. So there you have it, and it actually ends quite cleverly on a modern sort of lesson to take away, and that is why Angkor was abandoned in the late 14th, early 15th century. And they get into a little bit the science of climate change and how that applied to the 20 years of drought and then 20 or 30 years of intensive rains, which made the site unlivable. So the second exhibit I happened across quite by accident. I was over in Vancouver last weekend, and I was attending a conference, and they took us on a tour around various places. We stopped at the Museum of Vancouver to look at an exhibit on something totally different. And walking out, there was this kind of presentation, and I thought for a moment I was in the, well, it looked like I was in the middle of an architectural exhibit explaining something to do with a proposed development. And I thought, oh, well, this is quite good, because it must be the Musqueam proposal for the redevelopment of the kind of front end there of, well, across from from English Bay. And then I kind of looked more closely and said, well, no, that's not what the First Nations are proposing, something entirely different. It was only when I looked a little bit closer that I connected with a newspaper article I had read on the ferry going over. And it had to do with the Enriquez Partners exhibition that they had been invited to do, the lead exhibition for the 2021 Architectural Biennale in Venice. And the article was talking about it in the context of a Toronto version of it, but it ended up mentioning that there had been a Vancouver version. So suddenly I thought, is this what this is? And then it wasn't exactly evident right away, but then ghetto, right, okay, it rang the bell. So the theme that and by the way, Enriquez is it's quite a large Vancouver firm, architectural firm, was asked to address the theme, how will we live together? So the theme is, it's an issues-oriented theme. He chose, so he says, and this is his kind of an opening statement, as it were, ghetto is a theoretical rezoning project that I propose, that proposes the development of housing for refugees through the transfer of wealth created by the sale of timeshare condominiums to American tourists in Venice and now Vancouver. The exhibition considers the role of the architect in creating spaces for inclusion and questions the architect's role as a cordial convener and a custodian of the spatial contract. So what you're looking at there, it's a photograph of his, the project which floats above kind of English Bay. Angkor, by the way, got stuck in that slide somehow or other. It's nothing to do with it. So there's part of the exhibit literally quoted, so you can see it, as it was proposed in Venice. So in the Venetian version, he'd inserted these small living units into the fabric of Venice, sort of into squares and wide streets and through the thing. He got the idea of ghetto from the adjacent to the exhibit, the Biennale exhibit area in Venice was the original Jewish ghetto, right? So he picks up this idea of ghetto. So, and then he says, you know, Vancouver City facing similar challenges to Venice, including issues of housing and affordability, economic dependence on tourism, and the influx of immigrants and the displacement of residents. The exhibit's set up like you've gone to council for a rezoning application. So it takes you through, much like a presentation to city council. And it outlines all the elements of the proposal, how it fits, shows you on maps, designs. And so what's the core of this? How does it work? And so he's pretty clear. This theoretical architectural project proposes the provision of housing for refugees funded through a condominium timeshare model. The intention is to illustrate the power of the role of the architect in the creation of inclusive cities. The specific goal is to share a framework which leverages the power of the development community to provide the social benefit too. So what he argues is that the economics are such that if you built one timeshare for this highly lucrative market, you can rent these things at exorbitant prices, you can build one house for a refugee. So refugees and high-rolling visitors can all live together happily, I suppose. And then he uses various illustrations to show you how this can be done. On the white table there, you can't quite see it very well. I had to, by the way, take all these photographs in 3 minutes. The bus was running. And then a kind of an interesting part of it is he uses the modern, comic book, what do you call it? Graphic novel. Graphic novel. To take you through the exhibit, so if you can't quite read it, you're walking through the exhibit in a series of frames, and he shows all the ways in which people kind of interact and how they live in their lifestyle. And then he takes you through the life of a couple of people in the course of a day through another series of comic books. And I think the comic books are actually published and you could take them away, or at least ideally. So I leave it at that. It's just something to think about in that as we face, many of these issues today and the role of architecture in solving these issues, and then you do it, in this case, on an international stage, and cleverly he brought it back to Canada and is interpreting how you might at least think about these things in a contemporary context, in a local context, that you can then do that. So I'll leave that as a series of thoughts, and we can maybe pick up some of those ideas in the discussion which follows.
It seems my role here tonight is to kind of run through the history of how this exhibition came about. Many people probably know me as a woodworker and a furniture designer and whatnot. All very true. I'm still repairing furniture, refinishing, collecting, and all that sort of thing. But I started woodworking, I guess, in the 70s, and building houses, and then eventually moved into setting up a workshop, which I did in Chinatown in Victoria in 1979. And I worked out of there for about 10 years. So somewhere in the mid-80s, I met Chris Gower. Chris had just recently retired, or just come out of the architecture school in Vancouver, and returned to his hometown of Victoria, and had been running around Victoria taking pictures of John de Castri buildings. And he found out that I could help him with the project. The two of us got together, and I put together about 40 of these panels made out of half-inch MDF, which I referred to at the time as Medite. That was a common term for it. And painted the black, put special slot devices on the back so we could mount them on the wall, just setting screws at 18-inch centers and putting the panel up against it and shifting one way or the other to tighten it. So I learned a lot from Chris at that particular time. I think the outcome for me of working on the exhibition is I got to run around and see all these buildings. I had been familiar with John Castri's work a little bit, having done a renovation on a Castri house in St. Francis Wood, and also, knowing the CNIB building quite well. Ballantine Florist down on Douglas, and knew a few of the major buildings in town, but Chris's enthusiasm for De Castri really caught on, and I was running around trying to find houses in Colwood and various places, still looking for them. There are apparently several hundred of them out there. So I'm hoping that people that have seen this exhibition are motivated to do the same thing, to go around and see the houses. I think familiarity is an important aspect of heritage preservation. The more people you get to see these things, the more that they appreciate them, the better chance there is of preserving them. Now, we put this exhibition up first at it was a little gallery just at the entrance to the library at UVic, and an excellent place for students to see exhibits. They could come in the door, and that time people actually, took books out and did research in the library. Now they can do a lot of the stuff remotely, and probably many of them never even go to a library that often. But I'm reminded of a gallery in Regina called the Dunlop, where it was the library, and then they had a gallery right there. So it was, just obviously people bring their books back after a month and see a new show, and I thought it was an excellent idea. And it's rather too bad that the gallery is now located elsewhere in the library, and it's not accessible to students the way this particular exhibit was. I'll show you some pictures of the installation a little later. Just going to hold off on the slides. I just have a few of them. The exhibition was up in the fall of 1987, and then Chris, through his contacts, established it over in Vancouver at the Harbour Centre, Simon Fraser's new gallery and lecture center, I guess it was, in Vancouver. When we brought the exhibition over, put it up in 1989, and De Castri himself came over and spoke. It was a regular Alcan lecture series. And for about 10 years after that, I think the exhibition was in storage, and it didn't make its appearance again in one form or another till the early 2000s. And I've got a list of several exhibitions that incorporated the panels. But the idea was that these panels were to be used as components for other exhibitions, and that's what happened. So I have a listing of 3 or 4 exhibitions where these panels were actually seen again in one form or another. I think we're extremely lucky that in one of the exhibitions, some of the panels showed up, but we are also we're able to see the results of student model making. Chris had set up a workshop in model making at UVic in 2006, and I think he had teams of 2 or 3 students each working on making models. They made about 8 of them, I think, and presented them at this exhibition in 2006. Now, just to get to the present, Chris had been talking about remounting this exhibition. What you see here is actually, it's historical in a sense. There's lots of redundancy. There's some stuff that's a little bit out of date. Maybe too many pictures of the same object, the same building. Nonetheless, I think the decision was made just to not get into a can of worms, put the exhibit up, but it was in bad shape. A lot of the surface had been scratched. The photographs were a little bit torn up in a few places. And so we embarked on a project to restore the panels, which took quite a bit of work, painting and whatnot. And we had the good fortune this time around to have models that had been also stored at the Legacy, along with the panels, and they needed a little bit of work. So Chris Gower dove into that part of the project and revived some of the models. So it was quite a long process. I would say that it took longer to restore the panels and to get the models ready than to do the actual initial exhibition. But I must say that I'm really pleased to say that Chris really turned me on to Castri's work. And I was running around all over the place, and I'm hoping to get involved a little later and maybe setting up some kind of registry of his buildings so that make it public accessible, so people can go out on their own and discover some of his buildings. That's about all I wanted to say. I've just got a few slides. I'm going to throw out some questions. I'll put them up on the screen in a few minutes. And I hadn't wanted to say too much about, define anything particularly. I wanted to open it up to you to just come up with some ideas about how this might, what could come of this exhibition later and what comes out of it. Okay, this shows the exhibition in 1987. And it's funny, whenever I go to sign a check, I always put 19 something. And now I wanted to say 2087, but that's not quite right, but it's 1987. And it shows the old entrance to the library on the left there, or the turnstiles. And you walked just immediately to the right of the turnstiles. There's a really delightful little gallery that had shows probably on a monthly basis. And I think my wife actually exhibited paintings there at one time. So it was open to the public, and I think Martin had a lot to do with that. And so right from the mid-'80s, I was involved with Martin and with Chris on exhibitions, whether I really knew exactly whose role was what, but we were involved together starting in the mid-'80s. This is the poster that was, not a poster, it was really a placard, a little small poster that was developed for the Alcan Lecture Series. De Castri spoke at this series, and we delivered the models there. Drove over by car, set the thing up. I didn't actually hear him speak. I had to go back almost immediately, but Chris obviously would stay there. And, it was advertised. I think, I don't know what the turnout was. I don't know anybody here that might have been to it. But I think it was a success in the sense that it exposed Vancouverites to some of John de Castri's work. Now, these are the three exhibitions that I mentioned before. De Castri's work was shown initially in 1987 in Vancouver, in 1989, and then there was a bit of a break, and I think the panels were stored, and some of them may have shown up at a little exhibition put on at Queenswood. Maybe Martin can fill us in on Queenswood, but it was a Catholic retreat.
Yeah, Sisters of St. Anne's.
Sisters of St. Anne's that has now since been torn down, all except the chapel, as I understand it. So this would just have been about a year before de Castri died. So it included some of John's art, and I don't know the writing particularly, but there are panels, some of the panels that are here were likely shown there as well. And I think Chris had something to do with that, and unfortunately he's not here to elaborate on that. Now the next one, 2006, is when the models first appeared. And as I mentioned earlier, they were made by Chris's model making class at UVic. And I saw that exhibition. I was really quite taken with the models, and they unfortunately then disappeared for a number of years, and we revived them, got them from the legacy in the spring of this year. Martin did another exhibition. It was a broader scope on architectural modernism in Victoria, and featured a number of architects, and some of the work on the de Castri was original and may have found its way in here in one way or another, but none of these panels appeared there. Now, I'm just throwing out some ideas of what might happen with this exhibition. There's been talk of it maybe appearing at an REIC conference in Vancouver, possibly as early as next year. We might explore other venues. I have talked to people in Lethbridge who might be interested. So that's something that I'd like to see develop. And as I mentioned earlier, the idea of a registry, a map of de Castri sites. I was showing somebody around from Lethbridge just recently, around the Gorge area of Victoria, and I drove up and down 5 or 6 streets trying to find a house. I didn't have the address. It's one of my favorite de Castri houses, and it's all quite a joke. We got a good tour of parts of the Gorge. Now, we have talked a little bit about the idea of exhibiting renderings. The renderings that were shown here were prints, were copies. But I think there was a lot of interest in perhaps seeing the originals. I know in Vancouver, at the West Vancouver Museum, they had a showing of Hollingsworth's drawings, and they really were quite a hit. They were really quite amazing, especially in this day and age when so much is done on the computer. To see this handwork, it's a beautiful handwork. Now, again, referring partly to the West Vancouver Museum, they have very successfully tied in house tours with summer exhibitions on the architects that people might encounter on the tours. But notwithstanding, it would still be an idea, given the number of houses that Castri designed in Victoria, to possibly have a house tour. Now, when we had this initial, or the discussion at the initial event in June, somebody brought up the idea of there's a whole network of these people, you know, who sort of follow Wright's ideas, including one of my favorite architects in Los Angeles, what's his name? Somebody help me out. John Lautner, right. People like that. It's sort of a little bit off the mainstream, you know, Bart Prince, Goff himself, of course. But how would De Castri, how does he fit into this kind of community of architects that's out there? And you know, that might make an interesting source of comparison. Now, the questions I just wanted to throw out is that these exhibitions of photographs are now rather, well, they're not so important as they might have been, because, you know, I've been looking around at architects' websites. They have just gorgeous photographs at their sites, of their projects. And the question I have is, given the ubiquity of photos on the internet, are gallery-sited exhibitions of architectural photography still necessary? I think they are, but they need to be embellished. And I think we're very fortunate with this exhibition, not just to have photographs and panels, but to have had the models. I think it filled out the space, not a huge space, but it added another level of interest that people could compare the model to the actual, to the photograph to the actual model. So if it's still relevant, how can we enhance their appeal? Now, I am quite a fan of what's been going on in West Vancouver. I've been going over every summer for the house tours up until just recently, and some of the exhibitions, I've lent things there. I've, you know, helped out. I've done some research and whatnot. But I was going to show specific examples from Ron Tom's exhibition, and Adele here could maybe.
Well, actually, I curated
Yeah,
this.
you're the curator of that exhibition. It traveled to 2 other locations in Canada.
4 others.
4, sorry. But it was really a beautiful exhibition, beautifully done in a very small gallery space, exquisitely put together. Gave you a good full picture of Ron Tom's activities as an architect and as a designer of furniture, and a person concerned with you know, pottery and other craft activities. The other exhibition, there have been several, but several on Fred Hollingsworth, where they have been featuring his furniture and his lanterns and lamps. He had a welding studio in his house, and so he was quite keen on producing light fixtures, which he would, what shown on the right there is actually just made out of a metal pipe that's had sections cut out of it. Furniture, wrote by his wife, a photograph of a house. In other words, just broadening out the scope of this work by showing 3-dimensional objects.
So I just wanted to start by thanking Alan and Martin, and Chris, of course, who's not here. He's enjoying himself over in Italy, for putting this all together, really, and for bringing it back to life again here at Wentworth Villa. Also, Stacy in the REIC and all the other members here for funding the exhibit. It's been so great having that extra support. And of course, Stefan Opolsky and his wife Magda, the founders and principal operators here at Wentworth Villa. Thank you so much to all of you. And so I have had the pleasure, the huge pleasure and privilege is the way, how I think of it, of being here all summer while this exhibit has been on display. And I can say unequivocally, without any question, it's been an absolute high point of my of my work so far as an historian here in Victoria, and definitely of my time here at the museum, one of the most amazing experiences that I've been involved with. And there's a lot of reasons for that, and I could go on and on about the summer, the people I've met, and the various things I've heard about de Castri and learned about him in the process of welcoming and hosting this exhibit here. But I'll just mention one of them, one highlight, which was this last weekend. So we extended the exhibit for another week because it was so popular, especially after Martin wrote a wonderful newspaper article about the exhibit. Our numbers just shot up, and we were averaging 50 or 60 people per day towards the end of the summer there, which for us is incredible. And not only were there a lot of people, there were all different age groups, young, medium, old, everyone in between. And but on Saturday, it was the very last day of the exhibit, this last Saturday, one of our first visitors was a gentleman who's a psychology professor at UVic. And I don't know if anyone other than Joanne knows about this yet here, but he has taught in the de Castri designed Cornet building at UVic, which is that depicted in the model right there in the corner, for decades. I think he's still teaching at UVic, and he invited de Castri to come to his class back in the 90s and talk about the building. And he had the extraordinary foresight and ability to record this presentation that de Castri gave to his class of students, in which he talks for almost an hour about the Cornet building. And he just goes into great detail about it. And it's one of his, I think, one of his more impressive buildings, while still being one of the maybe his more controversial. And you know, there's all sorts of theories about how it came about, and you know, it's notoriously difficult to navigate for students at UVic. I enjoyed I was a student there myself, taking history classes in the Cornet building, and I always liked it once you finally got the lay of the land and figured out where your class was and how to get there. And but it was really interesting and this gentleman gave us a copy of this video. So I'm figuring we're just now going to try and figure out how to share it with the public. And it was so interesting to hear de Castri himself talking about addressing a lot of these questions that have come up about why he did this, why he did that, and how is, you know, all of the incredible thought that he put into this building. And so that was just one of many great visitors that we had, and it was truly a privilege to be here for all of that. So, but today I'm going to talk more specifically. So we've had a great introduction to exhibits in general, to the de Castri exhibit, some of the background, and I'm going to get into a little more, I'm going to get into de Castri himself as well, specifically now, and focusing even more specifically on the record that he left, incredible extensive record in the local media, and specifically in the newspapers. And he was very media savvy, you might say, media friendly. He was in hundreds of articles, and that's just in the Times Colonist paper and his previous incarnations as the colonist, going right back to the earliest years of his career in the 1950s. And so I went through those over the summer. Whenever I had a moment, I would go through and find any articles that stood out. And I'm just going to share, I'd like to share some of those with you tonight, because they're interesting for themselves, for what they are, what they tell us. But they're also, I think they can be a very important part of an architectural exhibit. And if you look around, there are exhibits all throughout this, or sorry, there are articles all throughout this exhibit, newspaper articles scattered throughout. And I think they're a very useful component of architectural exhibits for many reasons. Some of the key reasons that I came up with for how media records can facilitate and enhance architectural exhibits are, and these aren't the only three, of course, but some of the main ones, I think, is that they provide insight into the design, planning, and construction of the projects that you might not find elsewhere. They provide social context, such as community responses for these processes, so you're hearing all sorts of different perspectives, reading all sorts of different perspectives in these articles. And learning about, you know, everything that's happening, sort of the swirling controversies or whatnot that may have been may or may not have been happening at the same time that these projects were coming forth. And the third point is that they can also provide some really interesting biographical information about De Castri himself. So as Stacy mentioned, I'm a historian, my background's in history, and I'm a researcher, so I love getting into this stuff. So I'm just going to go through some of these articles. I'm going to read a few quotes, so I narrowed them down as much as I could, but there'll be a bit of reading here, but it's pretty interesting stuff, so I hope you enjoy. So this first slide, it doesn't look like much to start with, and you might even wonder how it relates to De Castri himself. This is kind of an unremarkable article at first glance, but the reason I'm starting with it is because I think it says something very fundamental and important about De Castri's character. So it's basically just a small little column, as you can see, talking about a talk that's coming up. And I'll read you a little quote of what an excerpt from the article. This is from 1965. A Roman Catholic scholar, a Presbyterian minister, a university history professor, and a Lutheran minister will meet at 8 p.m. on Thursday for a public discussion on Martin Luther. And if you don't know about Martin Luther, he was the, I think, 15th century German theologian, founder of Protestantism and so on. With John A. De Castri, the architect and club president, as moderator, the Newman Club alumni are sponsoring the panel in the Princess Louise room of the Empress Hotel. So the Newman Club, I did a little bit of research. Cardinal Newman was a British theologian or a member of the church person who, I think he sort of transitioned from Protestantism to Catholicism later, at some point later in his life. And anyway, I won't get into, it's a tangent from our subject, but that was the club that De Castri was the president of, and he was doing this presentation moderating this presentation. And at the end of the article, it says, De Castri concludes the article by stating that a well-informed Catholic, which he was, Italian Catholic background, has to be able to cope with both sides of controversial issues and world problems. So that says a lot, I think, about his character, and the way that I started to look at De Castri after reading through a lot of these articles was as this person who's kind of a mediator, a middle person, who's constantly throughout his life negotiating both sides of controversies. And I don't think it was that he sought out controversy for its own sake, but he seemed to have this innate tendency to create controversy or be around controversies, but in a way that he was trying to resolve them in a way and move past them and bring people together in some pretty incredible ways. So with that, we'll go into the next slide. And it's a transition still on the religious theme, and he was a very religious man, from what I understand. This is one of the churches that he designed. He designed many churches throughout his career. This is St. Joseph's Church, as you can see, considered to be quite radical at the time it was opened in 1963. And De Castri, in the article, he's quoted describing why it was so different, one of the reasons why it was so different and considered to be radical. Here's a slightly better picture of the church. This is not modern day, but a little better image. So in the article he says, the altar of sacrifice and altar of the Blessed Sacrament will be close to the center of the church. Because of the unusual design, the priest will be facing his congregation while saying Mass instead of having his back to them. This is another church he designed called the Church of the Sacred Heart. And this is 1966. You can see the headline again there, creating, turning heads. The modernistic city church reflects new thinking. I've got a couple more images of it. Here it is. And I think this is out by Christmas Hill sort of area, Mackenzie, in that area. Got a couple of more pictures. And these pictures are in the exhibit over here in the church and university corner. These beautiful arches at the front entranceway, the interior. And this is the blueprint. This was apparently the design here, De Castri claimed, was a product of the Second Ecumenical Council of the Vatican, otherwise known as Vatican II. So in the 50s and 60s, as many of you I'm sure know, the Catholic Church underwent this massive sort of rebirth, revisitation of how they wanted to present themselves to the world. And one of these was apparently facilitated an openness to designing churches in a new way. Here's another quote from that previous article by De Castri describing this church. "It is an example in Victoria of the new thinking and changes which have occurred in the Catholic Church. While the form of this building is unusual, it has been derived from the requirements of the liturgy. Here the priest faces the people and they are grouped around the altar to participate in the Mass. To achieve this feeling of community, circular forms have been used." And you can see those clearly in the drawing there. So, and it wasn't only churches that De Castri courted this controversial subjects and influenced people to look at things differently and think about things differently. This article I thought was really interesting because he's confronting this idea, you know, the idea of Victoria being more English than the English and so on, which I never even really understood that title or that idea. But, you know, and there's undoubtedly, of course, a large British influence here in Victoria, and it's something that cannot be ignored. But this was really an interesting perspective that De Castri promoted or brought forth on that subject, in which he said, if Victoria is preserving the English influence in its architecture, it is preserving the wrong part. Has this community really learned anything from English experience and example in housing? From the principles of town planning developed in England? From the impeccable taste the English show in street signs and street furniture? The things we latch onto are the things discarded by England. So an interesting perspective, I thought. And here, this article is in the exhibit over in the corner there, where it was the issue of the redesign of Government House over here a few blocks away after the fire, I think in the 60s, late 50s or 60s. And again, this subject came up of how to rebuild the Government House, what sort of design to use, if they should try to mimic something from the past. And this is, I think, a perennial question in architecture, or do something completely different. Of course, De Castri himself was all for doing something completely different. And he describes in this article a little bit why. He says, if Victoria is preserving the English influence in its architecture, it is preserving the wrong part. Oh, sorry, that was the last article. Government House should be modern, reflecting the spirit of our times and not a copy of the empty forms of the past. To say that it should have an atmosphere of dignity is to state a basic truth. But to attempt to classify that dignity as of the English variety is merely to verify our provincialism. Modern architecture is a method of thought similar to democracy, not a series of cliches. And then he concludes that article with the prophetic words, we will have the kinds of buildings that we deserve. This was a great article from the Islander, going right back. So these aren't chronological here. I'm presenting these somewhat random time frame, but this is a 1954 article. It's basically a small biography of the up-and-coming John De Castri. He was only 30 years old, just starting out basically in his practice here. And it goes into great detail. There's interviews and questions, and quite a well-informed and observant writer, Mr. G.E. Mortimer. And so I'm going to read a couple of excerpts from this because it's just some great content. And as a primary source, I think these articles can be invaluable for exhibits. So, as I've been indicating, and this journalist confirms, De Castri's converts spread his gospel with an early Christian fervor. Opponents denounce him just as vigorously. Few of those who have seen his buildings are neutral. The vehemence of the debate, some say, is an unfailing sign of an original mind at work. De Castri himself seems little concerned by the mild storms that rage around his head. He is suave and self-assured. His only aim is to build a good house that meets the client's individual needs and his own sense of fitness. He establishes a kind of doctor-patient relationship with the future homeowner and asks a number of tactful questions about work, play, social life, family, and tastes in building materials. At the end of the questionnaire, the client may well have gained some new knowledge about himself. De Castri certainly did not originate the idea of probing a client's living habits. All architects are supposed to do it. He carries out the ritual with extreme thoroughness, that's all. De Castri likes to talk in an almost mystical way about the influence a building has on the minds of those who live or work in it. But at the same time, he remains keenly aware of the more utilitarian aspects of his profession. And this is a quote, again, De Castri's words. It is a basic requirement that the building should serve the practical use which it is designed to serve. But the building should do more. It should also be pleasing to the eye. It should have a rhythm, a harmony. There is a place for ornament in its design, and a house should feel at once snug and spacious. The important thing is space in the building. But if you start to talk to a client about spatial relationships and the interpenetration of space, you'll frighten the pants off him. So again, he's always walking this sort of middle line. Another of his principles is the honest use of materials, letting each material boldly announce its identity, rather than have stucco masquerading as stone and wood trying to pass itself off as brick. He uses many of the devices of contemporary architecture, carrying through a material from the outside to the inside, planting some rooms corner-wise, making mitered corner windows, laying wall-to-wall carpets on concrete floors. But the lines and forms of his buildings appear to be his own. They condense in the abstract drawings and paintings which he does for a pastime, then take solid shape and are molded in terms of time and place as houses, stores, or offices. He yields a certain amount to customers' whims, but if they threaten the integrity of the work, he refuses to take the commission. And then towards the article, the journalist asks why, he says, why does some ask why De Castri chose such a conservative town as Victoria in which to build houses of such advanced design? And De Castri's answer is perhaps deceptively simple. It was because it is my hometown, he says. And I think that's simple but also quite profound, as so much about this incredible man. So with that, I just wanted to end with a few slides of some articles that sort of eye-catching and interesting articles, just to share a few of these with you in conclusion. So this was De Castri presenting a project. I think it's what became the Garth Homer Institute out in Saanich. I was hoping that Ken would be here tonight. Ken Johnson of the Hallmark Society on the left there with the glasses. I think this is from the 60s. So, and this is one of another really, I think, important, valuable aspect of articles is they present these projects, many of them which never happened, including illustrations and drawings. Again, this is, I think, what became the Garth Homer Institute. This is a few years later, though, 1977. I think it took a while to build. This was an early apartment project De Castri proposed for Yates Street. I don't think it was built. I think this was the 50s. The View Street Parkade, which I didn't learn until quite recently, was a De Castri design, which did get built, I think, more or less as is shown here in the drawing. some of the comical and eye-catching headlines that he brought about. Lots of pictures of the man himself as well. John de Castri, New Thinking. Lots of ads for de Castri homes. This was one of the more interesting that I found. The de Castri home designed for you. 13,000. Yeah. Office spectacular to rise on Douglas Street. I don't know if it ever did. This is an incredible plan that I had never heard of, or perhaps someone else here knows about it, and why it didn't happen. I haven't looked into it yet, but this is the Inner Harbor. You can see the Parliament buildings in the top left there, and the CPR steamship terminal. And look at this incredible collection of buildings that he was proposing for the Inner Harbor there, for the waterfront. So that would be right around where the Coho terminal is today. And I know they're in the process now of redesigning the Coho terminal. Hopefully we'll get something as interesting as this. I won't hold my breath. This was the St. Louis College, just over here on Pandora. You can see, next to the former St. Louis College, which was demolished and turned into the Save on Foods that we have there today. I remember this. It's a parish center, basically a church community center that was beside it for many years. Another large proposal for the Inner Harbor. This was apparently right at the end, right across from Bastion Square on Wharf Street on the waterfront there. And those two big towers you see in the image up top would be right down along the waterfront in that lower parking lot area basically right beneath Bastion Square. De Castri seemed to be all for it. He thought the proposal was pleasing. Of course, it never happened. There are a few articles about this, and it stirred up quite a lot of controversy. De Castri, in his role as the mediator and the moderator in one of the community discussions about the project, was criticizing the audience for being too aggressively critical of this man Reed, who was the proponent, I think the main proponent for the project. So again, courting controversy, but seeking to resolve it at the same time. And then here we are, a mere 20 years ago. This article's in the exhibit, again in the back corner there, bringing us right up, more or less, to the modern day, under one of his earliest homes in Victoria that he designed up here in Rockland, talking about, basically the article is describing how this was one of the first, if not the first, mid-century houses to be added to the City of Victoria Heritage Registry. And there's the man himself standing proudly underneath his work. So I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. So, questions?
If I could just
Sure.
say something, Stacy, because Chris did have a little bit of an agenda which we could maybe point this discussion in the direction of, and that is that Chris is not just the fourth curatorial rung here. He's the chair of the RAIC, Southern Vancouver Island Network, which is the group of architects that meet on a regular basis and coordinate various learning activities for the most part. And we've been in discussions, we being part of the, what is it?
Executive,
Is it? This thing is so amorphous, I never know it, right? With the RIC, that first of all, that we should perhaps formalize a relationship with Wentworth Villa in order to do more events of an educational nature, perhaps more exhibitions, and that we kind of, be more of a presence here. And the second thing is that the network might have a role in developing exhibitions, and that through the RAIC Canada that these might be circulated so we could borrow some from afar and send some from out. So the notion that there could be an exhibition program might be one of the things that would come out of what we're beginning here as part of a kind of community discussion about the role of architects in public life. So,
Excellent,
yeah.
excellent. Adele, I think you had a question, comment.
Well, yes, well, congratulations on creating the show. I know very well how exhausting and how challenging and how expensive it is to do any kind of architectural exhibition. And I think what was said earlier was absolutely right, that pictures and panels don't cut it anymore because the internet's full of text and pictures, and you've got models which are very expensive to build and to travel. And I think even models don't cut it anymore. I think we have to move into multimedia and actually architectural sections like replications, materials and things. That costs money, and we're at a crossroads right now where the Ron Tom exhibition that literally crossed Canada, I had to raise over $150,000, and more than half of that funds came from the Canada Council for the Arts, which had an architecture section and a wonderful Harvard-trained architecture officer that championed architecture, and that's gone. And it's really difficult now to get funding for any kind of architectural project for the Canada Council. And I'm wondering if that's been your experience. Did you try for this exhibition? Would you consider joining with some of us who have approached actually the RAIC to see about, with Graham Livesey and Elsie Lamb, to see if we can talk to the Canada Council to get architecture back to the front burner?
I think, I don't know what others might say to this, but first of all, Adele, I absolutely agree. There's actually two kind of architectural exhibits. I was talking, I introduced the idea of the big, the big splash. And certainly, the walk-through experiential exhibits, that will be one track. But I think there is a track which, for exactly this kind of show, and there are venues across the country which could show it. And I think it's something that the RAIC right now actually is considering, and perhaps, I don't know if they've yet targeted Canada Council or any specific funding source. They're not a great wealthy organization themselves. But to start having those conversations, I'm old enough to remember when there was a vigorous culture in Canada of architectural and design exhibits, associated with, what we broadly call now the decorative arts. And you've seen institutions like Canada Council, for instance, going almost exclusively with, first of all, the big and major venues, and secondly, the fine art approach, to Canadian culture. So there's an issue here that needs, I think, airing publicly.
Could I just jump in there, Martin? This exhibition was done virtually for free. I mean, I scrounged materials to put together display stands and storage facilities. I charged something like $200 for paint and hardware and that sort of stuff, which the RAIC is covering, obviously. But this was all done with free labor all the way back to when it originated in 1987. I spent my own money, $100. Chris spent countless hours running around taking photographs, and I believe his brother had a darkroom. So I've been involved in this sort of world now for 25, 30 years as a freelance curator. And you never get paid, Like at some point, I just wonder, when are you going to wake up? But we keep doing it. you know, because we love the topic, we love the results, we love, you know, portraying information and ideas, and we just keep doing it, and I won't stop. But you do have to think about the cost, and I'm retired, so I can carry whatever minor costs there are, but there has never been an exhibition I'm involved in where you actually get paid, really. You appear to get paid, you get an honorarium, or you get a fee, but you know, the last major exhibition I did at the Vancouver Art Gallery, I got paid $15,000 for 3.5 years' work. That's on top of 25 years' experience in collecting. So it's, you know, this sort of thing can happen, as Martin says, on this particular scale. And when Adele, when I talked to you a couple of weeks ago, you mentioned, look at the work of Michael Green, which I did. I went to some of the websites, and my God, they're beautiful websites. There's some amazing work going on in Victoria right now. And I just picked that as an example because that was a suggestion you made. But I could see a venue like this being ideal for local architects to present their work. But again, you can see a lot of it on a website. So what makes it different? What makes a room like this offer different opportunities? Certainly you can put things on the wall, and that's a good start, but you can see that on a website. So what did they do to elaborate on the presentation? And I'm, you know, I was blown away by some of the architecture going on in the city, which I wasn't aware of. And that's something I'd certainly like to see, and hopefully see it done inexpensively. But just warning everybody that it's, you know, it's usually a lot of labor by a lot of people working for nothing that gets it done. And I'm not complaining about it at all, but it's just that's just a fact of life. And maybe it's changed from when Martin was running the Mallwood, and there's much more interest in it and much more money available right now. It seems to be off the agenda.
I mean, do you think it's right that it's volunteer essentially? I mean, I don't work for free. I work for money.
Yeah.
I'm terrible. But the thing is that it relegates curatorial leadership to those who are retired or have day jobs or faculty appointments, an affluent certain community, and it really keeps a lot of other groups out of the curatorial game. I think it's wrong, and I think it's wrong to expect no pay. I don't think, I think curating is too important to be considered a volunteer hobby kind of.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Yeah, I mean, we do keep doing it for free, and I know that I should, you know, stop doing it. But that's the fact of life.
But then there won't be the exhibitions.
Sorry?
But then there won't be the exhibitions.
Well,
There will if you work and you lobby the government to get the architecture officer back again.
yeah.
And also corporations, you know, the Alcon lecture was a great sponsor of architecture culture, and they're gone, but we can seek other corporate sponsors to also partner, you know, put in their share.
I think there was a question in behind.
I'm not suggesting anyone should work for free. I agree that people who are in arts should earn a decent living. But I do have an observation about this kind of display. I get tired of looking at things on a computer screen. I think a display like this is so accessible to people who might not really know that they like architecture, but they see something kind of interesting. It's not intimidating. They're not going into a big exhibit where there are lots of professionals speaking architect. I have a brother-in-law who does it, drives me crazy. And they can come in and they can see, oh, I know that building. Oh, yeah, I recognize that building. And I think it provides a huge educational component for people who otherwise might not realize they actually enjoy good architecture, might start thinking about the difference between the conservative architecture that we see so frequently downtown in particular, and something that sort of stands out as being different. So I think there's a huge role for this kind of exhibit in a community like, in a city like Victoria. I think you should definitely do more. And we've got so many incredible architects who have been here, whose buildings are still standing, that, you know, there's
It
huge
just amazes
potential.
me how illiterate everyone is about architecture. I mean, it's just a small group of people that want to become more literate and, you know, understand architecture. So I guess that's what gets a lot of us going, is that we're trying to fulfill some kind of educational role. And I don't necessarily mean top down. This is a little bit elitist, I suppose. It's you know, taking an established architect. Love to see something else happen, but we're starting here. But there's sort of an illiteracy about it, just basic, you know, use of materials. Like when I walk around and see houses that have stone on a gable and then wood below, or, you know, there's something, you know, something basically wrong here. Now, Goff being an exception, Bruce Goff, he can do whatever he likes, and I love it all. But it's just, you know, just goofy things happening. I mean, we're doing it out of self-preservation. I mean, I can't stand walking around the urban environment a good part of the time. If I allowed myself to be hypercritical, I'd kill myself. I mean, I can't handle it, you know? So you have to learn how to handle it, and you see the good here and there and all that, and there's some good examples. But there's just some ugly stuff happening, and you know, I think we're all driven to do something about it. And this is one way we can do it, so be it.
If I could just add to your point as well, and that's definitely been my experience being here this summer, is that we all, from the layperson to the architect, him or herself, that people have really enjoyed, I think, looking at these images. And I think there's also something to be said for seeing images in relation to each other, more than one image at once, which is difficult on a little computer screen. And if you can look at multiple panels quickly, not to mention in relation to models and everything else that can be involved with an exhibit, I think that adds a lot as well. So even, and I think, yeah, this is part of addressing that illiteracy, is creating these exhibits, but even for people who maybe aren't so interested in knowing everything about architecture or the more technical side of it, people just like to come in and see a building that they recognize and they've seen their whole life and know that it was designed by this, one of our greatest architects. And I think that can be as rewarding as anything.
Well, I think it allows a connection with the community. I mean, if a person hasn't seen a particular building and they come in here and see it, then they walk around town and they say, oh, and they make a connection. You know, they've learned something about the built community, the built environment, and that's a role that these kinds of exhibitions can do, just make people aware of something that's in their community that they maybe didn't know before.
Yeah. Terry?
You asked the question, what can we do, or how can we do something differently? And I think tonight's a great example. I mean, we listen to CDs or we watch a TV program, but isn't it much better to actually go and listen to the concert itself? And I think that's what we're doing right now. And I think there's a huge opportunity for that to continue. So I see this as a really good start. You know, this city has so much to offer, this province has so much to offer. And so I think we can draw on that. But unfortunately, it does take a huge amount of time. It takes a huge amount of money, or an amount of money. But I think we can do it. I mean, we architects knew about the exhibit, but Martin's article in the Weekender at the Times Commons, I had all sorts of friends and people who said, "Oh, I didn't know about that," and they came to the exhibit. So I mean, that's just one issue that Martin created and got the pebbles in the water, and it rippled from there. So I think there's a huge opportunity.
Terry, I think it started when Adele gave her talk here. I noticed that people that hadn't been out socially for 2 or 3 years, we suddenly reacquainted ourselves, you know? We came to this was the focal point, to come to an exhibition or a talk that would pull us all together. And the room was full. We had, 80 or 90 people here. And, you know, it was an indication to me that there was something here missing. And this kind of event where people can discuss ideas, because we don't have an architecture school, was really critical.
I think there is a thirst. There is an interest. Um, Twice I gave a presentation to Oak Bay, in Oak Bay, about modernist movement in Oak Bay and examples of the Bauhaus movement, where I was able to say, you know, the Bauhaus movement is over 100 years old. And you look around Oak Bay and you can see some fabulous examples of that work, and much of it. And yet there's this image that Oak Bay is traditional, staid, and it really isn't particularly interested in modern architecture. That's not true. So we can be provocative and say, but once you engage people in, oh, I didn't know, yeah, makes a huge difference. So I think what we're doing now is a big step in the right direction.
Thank you. I think was there a question in Beth?
I was just sort of thinking about, you know, what I've enjoyed in architectural exhibits in museums, and of course I love museums where they've taken an entire room. Like I think it's the Abacon in Toronto, and there's a room that's like a den of one of the founders, I think, of the museum, and he was a collector, and you know, it's like floor to ceiling of things that he purchased because he loved, and you know, they just took the whole room, the paneling, the shelving, like a library, and there were some furnishings in the center, and it's like, wow, it really had a huge impact. And I've gone other places, and I think I've seen you know, different architects, maybe Morris and different architects' rooms that have been recreated in museums. But I also think you could do it on a little bit more of a smaller scale. Even just have some furniture that might have been in some of these houses arranged so that, you know, you could look at the exhibit whilst sitting in maybe a conversation room or something like that. And I also think that the stories of people living in the houses or using the buildings, like, you know, talking about getting used to the Cornet building and finding your way around, but then you liked it. Like those kind of anecdotal stories, I think, kind of bring the building to life. And, you know, looking at this Rockland building, and imagine what it's like to live there as the seasons change and the views change, and, you know, where they eat their breakfast, or, you know, how the building functions for people, because that's really kind of what architecture comes back to. When they start to ask the questions, that's how the product relates, right? Is how you live in the space. Yeah, just some thoughts of.
Pick up on a couple of these ideas, and we're talking about Adele's lecture, which brought together a cohort of people who hadn't met in years and years, and yet we mostly all knew each other, and we knew we were all interested in this topic. Well, I put the challenge out to Stefan and Magda and Ben that perhaps Wentworth could look to being a nexus for this kind of thing. I mean, you know, it's one thing to look at our heritage, both historical and contemporary modern, but you know, Victoria's going through right now the biggest building boom ever. It's had 2 or 3 in the past, but nothing like what's happening now. And you see all these condos going up, but we have streets of homeless people. And there's no real public forum that can put those issues together. And, you know, Enrique's in Vancouver, he's thinking about those sorts of things. We need a lot more people to think about these sorts of things. And as you say, the degree of architectural illiteracy is incredible. I mean, what I see happening at street level, you know, with the high-rise buildings going up, that suddenly Victoria's looking like Nowheresville. You go to 100 or 1,000 other cities, and it's starting to just look like that. And where's the debate? Where's the discussion? Well, the latest thing is challenging both mid-century modernism and heritage and contemporary design is the debate going on right now about Centennial Square. A city council that doesn't see any merit in the mid-century modern part of it, including the fountain. So I think there could be, to move Wentworth on, to be more active in these, as a place where we could meet, discuss, debate, put up exhibitions, and you just need that, a good financial backing. That, $200,000-300,000 a year would probably do it to start with. Quarter of the price of a condo going up down the block.
Might be a bit steep.
Any other questions? Dude, comments? Terry?
Not a question as much as, I think if we asked practicing architects in the city to talk about their approach to architecture, what particularly interests them, I think you'd find a good response. And so very often we work away back in our offices and just do the thing and move on. But nobody asks, or very rarely do we ask, what was the intent? What were you looking to achieve other than 50 condo units or whatever? But even in doing that, what was the intent? What was the desire? What was the wish? And you can ask those questions and I think gain so much.
I think there's something to be said for bringing people together for a talk given by an architect, a local architect, to basically explain what they're doing. I mean, we see buildings going up. I see examples all the time of some pretty extraordinary buildings. I don't really know what's behind them, but I'd love to come to a gathering like this, a monthly gathering where a local architect, a good architect, stands up and presents slides if necessary, models if they have them, and we just listen to what the rationale for the building was. That's one way we can educate ourselves and other people, is to see what people are doing, understand what they're doing.
I think the opportunity's there. We just need to ask the right people and ask the right questions.
Yes.
I just wanted to pick up on Alan's point. I agree. I think if you're doing an exhibition like this, from my experience, one of the things that people really dig into is the relationship between the architect and the person who's commissioned the building. And people love hearing those stories about why they were built and how it's been shaped and made over time.
Yeah.
There's one in this exhibition that really resonated with me about a woman who was an author. I can't think of the name right now, who lived alone, yes, and had quite a small, discreet building. And to me, it's the thing that I remember after going through all of these panels. So it's something that's really good to run with. And I would also say, like on the point of raising money to do these things in a way that would excite people, I think one of the great successes of your exhibition, Adele, was having objects in the space, like the door that you borrowed from a Ron Tom house. Yeah. And people love, to pick up on what you said too, Bev, people love having objects that can make them, if you're here looking at photos, you're looking at models, just have something tangible to give you a feel for that space. A few objects can go a long way.
Well, I'm an object person, and let me tell you,
Yeah.
you have an exhibition with objects, and just people really gravitate to it.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, what can happen is that people nostalgize. I once exhibited some radios, an exhibition I did at the AGGV a few years ago, and you get people coming up to you saying, "Well, my grandmother had one of those," or that pot you displayed over there, well, I remember burning the bottom of it, or something like that. That's all fine, but at least they're relating to it.
Yep.
Another thing I'd like to say, that the exhibition, if people missed it, at the AGGV, where they had art and furniture and a bit of documentation together in one room, was, I think, very popular. And, it exhibited new things that people maybe hadn't seen before. And it was very fresh and, I think, popular with the public.
I just have to jump in here. I can't resist the opportunity for a quick plug. We have one of our upcoming exhibits is about Carpenter Gothic architecture. So not modern mid-century, but it's going to be hopefully put together this fall. Will be put together this fall, and we have a couple of items from the Church of Our Lord, one of our most best examples of Carpenter Gothic architecture in Victoria. They're loaning us some incredible church furniture, beautifully crafted Gothic style chairs and some other items for that exhibit. So we're trying to do that.